Hi everybody, this video is for today's class. Today is January 4th and tomorrow is January 5th. I am obviously out for COVID and this is the content that I would have taught you if I was there in person. It'll be a little more boring than usual, probably because we won't be able to interact, but I figure it's better than nothing. All right, so today, the Congo, Imperialism in Africa, Unit 5. Imperialism, that's when one country comes and takes over another country and forces it to do things to its own benefit, to their own benefit. This is Unit 5. We're picking up where we left off last semester. Congo. The Congo is a beautiful area of the world. It's a rainforest. It's tropical. It's near the equator. For those of you that are familiar with Central America, think like the Amazon rainforest, but with elephants. It's a rainforest, just like the Amazon, but the African version. There's lots of rivers, there's lots of water, there's lots of rain, lots of plants, and lots of beautiful animals, such as my favorite, the elephant. This is day 1 of our unit. Today we're talking about the Congo. Later on, we're going to talk about the Berlin Conference and the Herero people of Southwest Africa. Then we'll talk about the Zulu. Then we'll talk about Nigeria. Then the Maji Maji and Ethiopian rebellions. All right, skipping right ahead. The focus question for today, the daily focus question, I will read it out loud for you. It is, what technological innovations gave Europeans advantages and made them able and willing to dominate people in Africa? What technology made Europeans able to dominate people in Africa? And also, what technologies made people willing to dominate people in other places? So we're going to start off with the story of Dr. Livingstone and Henry Morgan Stanley. If you finished your reading, you already know who these people are. I'm going to assume you did that. These two men show two very different types of European paternalism. The stories of Dr. Livingstone and Henry Morgan Stanley show different types of paternalism as in pater, as in father. So these are two guys that kind of think of themselves as like the white guy savior father of African people. And they kind of have two different personalities or two different approaches to being that father, so to speak, for the African people. Over here on the left, we have Dr. Livingstone. He was a missionary. His goal in going to tropical sub-Saharan Africa was to convert people to Christianity. He was a very unsuccessful missionary. He only managed to successfully convert one person, as far as we can tell, to become Christian. He blamed Muslim missionaries. He blamed the Muslim Islamic religion for this. He encountered a lot of people that followed traditional religions, like we talked about last semester. But he also encountered a lot of people who had converted to Islam, and he wanted everyone to convert to Christianity. While he was going around being a missionary and trying to teach people to be Christian, he encountered a lot of the effects of the slave trade. The European slave trade on the coast of Africa, as we know, had been going on for hundreds of years and had long, far-reaching effects. He encountered a lot of Muslim slave traders, people who interacted with people in the far inland. We all know that like white people didn't go far inland into Africa, but Arabs did. And this just contributed to his hatred of Muslims. So he's kind of an Islamophobic Christian missionary, and he thinks he knows what's good for African people. And he wants to end slavery for their protection, which is nice. It's a nice kind of fatherly thing, but it's also a little judgmental because he really thought that everyone should become Christian. On the other hand, we have Henry Morgan Stanley, this guy over here, who's kind of an adventurer and a reporter. He's a journalist, a travel writer. These days, he'd be like an influencer, sort of travel Instagram blogger. But back then, he worked for newspapers in America, and he was hired by some newspapers to go and find Dr. Livingstone. So Dr. Livingstone had gone off into Congo to convert the natives, and no one had heard from him for several years. So Henry Morgan Stanley went to find Livingstone and rescue him from darkest Africa, from like the evil Africans. This picture on the right about Henry Morgan Stanley also tells us some more about him. He was a pretty judgmental guy. He thought he knew what was best for everybody. He thought he was going to rescue the Black people of Africa. And this is all kind of tied up in his this picture here. This is Henry Morgan Stanley posing for a picture back in London with his, I guess we could say, adopted son. This guy, the I guess kid, because he's maybe 10 years old in this picture, named Mahali, was born in Africa, and he was Henry Morgan Stanley's favorite kid. He was given to Stanley as a gift, as a slave. Mahali was his name, Ndugu Mahali, which meant my friend's brother. Stanley didn't like the name my friend's brother, so he changed his name, and he called him Kalulu, which was a Swahili word for a antelope. Also, Kalulu is a Swahili word. Swahili is a language from Eastern Africa. As far as anyone knows, Mahali was from Western Africa, so it's just kind of rude all around. It feels a little rude all around. Also unclear if there's some sexual stuff going on that's also icky and we don't need to talk about. All of which is to say that Henry Morgan Stanley had a different kind of paternalism. He kind of looked down on the he definitely looked down on the African people. He definitely thought Black people were inferior to him. But he saw an opportunity to make money off of manipulating the Black people of the Congo. This picture in the middle is allegedly the way that it went down when Henry Morgan Stanley here on the left met up with Dr. Livingstone here on the right. Dr. Livingstone was living as a missionary, trying to convert the Muslims, and Henry Morgan Stanley was going to rescue him. Okay, so that moves us to what did Henry Morgan Stanley do in the Congo and why do we care? And what he did is he made pretty shady trade deals with villages across the Congo on behalf of the King of Belgium. And we're going to talk more about those on the next slide. So let's get oriented in space and time, and let's access our prior knowledge about the Congo region. So this is the Congo Free State. This is the Atlantic Ocean. Over here, we have Angola, and then the Congo Kingdom that we studied last year was right here. And then up here, further to the west, would be places like, what we called the Slave Coast back in the 1700s, and the Gold Coast. The Ashanti lived kind of over here. The Congo Free State was this entire Congo River basin, and here it is for reference in the broader continent. It's a giant area, pretty much completely inland, and it connects to the ocean via the Congo River right here, going through a city you can tell right here called Leopoldville. King Leopold of Belgium, a tiny little country in Europe, decided he wanted to take over this whole area. And he named it the Congo Free State because he said he was doing this in order to free the people of Congo from slavery. This was kind of a big scam. Actually, it was a big scam. King Leopold was lying. He told all the Europeans he's going to end slavery. He's going to end the slave trade, which I guess was ending anyways. This is right in the time period when the U.S. was making slavery illegal. One of the only major slave trading countries left was Brazil. Okay, but he didn't exactly free the people of Congo. The people of Congo, the African people who lived in a variety of countries and nation states in the Congo River Valley, were tricked by Henry Morgan Stanley into signing trade treaties to trade only with King Leopold. And Henry Morgan Stanley got each town to sign these treaties that they often couldn't read. And then they flew a blue flag with a yellow star like this, the flag of the Congo Free State. And this meant that those people were only able to trade with the company. And in exchange, allegedly, supposedly, the company would protect them from Arab slave traders. On the other hand, there weren't that many slave traders left, and the people in these towns were going to be held effectively as slaves to the company. Next question. How did new inventions make it possible for Europeans to travel inland? So, as you probably remember from Unit 2 last semester, it was very difficult for Europeans to get inland in Africa at all. The geography was difficult, there were diseases, there were dense forests, the rivers were hard to navigate. Um, and so, any trade that was done inland was done by Black people, by local African people who lived there. But new inventions made it possible for Europeans, for white people, to travel into Africa. The Congo River is one of those things that made it difficult to travel inland. Here's a sort of satellite image of part of the Congo River, and you can see that it gets wide, but it also gets really narrow. There's sections like this that are easy to travel on boats, and then there's sections like this with rapids and waterfalls that are much harder to travel by boat. Traveling downstream through the rapids, obviously difficult with cargo. Traveling upstream through rapids, obviously impossible. At first, Europeans used porters, just hordes and hordes of hundreds of guys to carry stuff in and out for them, mostly things like ivory and raw materials. But eventually, with the invention of the steam engine in the 1800s, steam ships and steam locomotives were brought to Africa, assembled, and used to travel up and down these rivers. So porters like these were then used to transport pieces of machinery up the river so that behind the waterfall there could be a steamboat traveling up and down this part of the river. And then subsequently, railroads were built to go around the rapids. Railroads like this one were built all across the Congo. Local people were forced to build these railroads. They were not, uh, that's my kitty. They weren't paid very much, and also it was incredibly difficult labor. Porters often dropped dead, and for the railroad itself, each of these cross pieces, these ties, these boards that go this way across the tracks, it is said that for each one of those that was laid, it was paid for with the death of a human. And that's my kitty meowing. I need to turn the page. Excuse me. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the next question is, how did pneumatic air-filled rubber tires, the invention of rubber tires, change the value of the resources in the Congo? How did the invention of rubber tires make it more valuable to have the Congo? And how did the rubber tires make Europeans want to exploit the Congo even more than they already did? So in the Middle Ages, you have wheels like this one that are solid wood. In the 17th, 18th centuries, you have wheels like this that are wood surrounded by steel. And then in the 19th and then 20th centuries, you have wood wheels surrounded by rubber. These rubber tires were a brand new invention, invented in the 1890s, basically. And they made things like bicycles with rubber tires, like you guys are familiar with, or automobiles with rubber tires possible for the first time. Rubber is really, really good stuff. It's a great material, and you can use it to make really great things. So the Congo already had a ton of rubber trees. Rubber comes from trees like this picture here. It is the coagulated sap from these trees. You know, sap from trees is sticky. Rubber is kind of sticky in a weird kind of way. The way you get rubber out of trees, you cut the bark off like this. You let the sap run down into a bucket. You capture it. Rubber trees also have sap in these big long vines. As you can see here, this guy is capturing it. He's cutting the vine there. The sap is going to drip down into this pot. And this liquid captured into the pots is then coagulated and collected, hardened into baskets like these that these guys are carrying here. Rubber only grows naturally below in the tropics, in the between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Here's the equator on the map. So rubber grows naturally in some parts of Mexico and parts of the Amazon rainforest, in equatorial Africa near the equator, in parts of Indonesia and Southeast Asia that are close to the equator. But as you can see from this map, the Congo is right smack in the middle of one of the largest naturally occurring rubber areas of the world. The colony of the Congo Free State instantly became 96% more profitable because rubber was something that everyone in Europe wanted. And Leopold As a personal individual, the King of Belgium, he pretty much owned that entire area. And he got greedy. He wanted more and more and more rubber. Side note, you notice these guys with very smooth bodies. One of the ways to coagulate the rubber and solidify it, if you're out in the rainforest, is to smear the liquid on your skin and then rip it off, kind of something akin to like waxing. And that way you could bundle it up, roll it up, and put it in these baskets easier. Um, Kind of a painful way to do your job. So King Leopold got greedy. He wanted more and more rubber. And so he instated a rubber tax on the people of the Congo. He sent military style agents to the Congo to enforce this taxation. The agents were hired to go village to village and collect rubber, and then send it in periodically to the ships, which then sent it to the railroads, which then sent it to the coast, which then sent it to Belgium, where King Leopold could make millions and, in today's dollars, probably billions and trillions off of it. Local villages, small villages, were terrorized by these tax collectors, these agents, because the agents were paid more based on how much rubber they collected. Initially, it was going to a town and saying, you need to fill this quota, or else, with sort of vague threats of violence. But eventually, these quotas were filled by force, by the threat of military violence, and by the taking of hostages. One way that this was done is that the Belgians hired a force publique. And this is a picture of them up here, led by a white Belgian guy. And these guys are the force publique. They are like sort of the public, so to speak, army of the Congo Free State. These guys, as you can see in the picture, are pretty young. Young teenagers recruited, given guns, given a job, and said, go to the town next to yours and tell them to collect rubber. And if they don't, you can shoot people. Young men were specifically recruited from towns and brought to towns not near their own, so that it was neighbors. It wasn't neighbors shooting neighbors. It was people who already kind of had rivalries with people in other places. So it's like taking people from one country, giving them guns, and sending them to another country to shoot those people. Additionally to that, hostages were taken in each village, each town, each city, depending. One way that the force publique got rubber collection was they'd go into the town and kidnap and capture and chain up hostages. You can see in this picture 5 men taken as hostages, chained together, guarded by 2 members of the force publique, or 4 members of the force publique, sorry. The hostages were chained up and threatened, and if the town didn't bring the right quota, then the hostages would be tortured or even killed. One of the biggest pieces of advice to agents was to try to take hostages that were old people or women or children, because the men of the village would try to save them, and also the men of the village were better used to collect rubber than the women. There's a lot you could say on this. It's very similar to what the conquistadors did when they came to America. You think about how the conquistadors held Amerindians hostage in exchange for gold quotas. It's the same sort of MO. On the left here, we have a picture of a village that has been completely destroyed. This is the kind of picture that was taken by missionaries and brought back to places like the US to show people how quote unquote primitive the people of Congo were. The trick is that this village looks like this after the force publique has gone through, kidnapped men and adults, burned the village down partially, and left only, as you can see in that picture, only like 2 adult women and a bunch of children. If someone were to come through your village, kidnap all of the able-bodied men and able-bodied women except for 2, and left behind only the children, it's not a surprise that the village looks like this. You're not going to have a thriving civilization when most of your people have been kidnapped or killed. We have this quote from a Presbyterian missionary. Christian missionaries kept going to Congo in the tradition of Henry Morgan Stanley. And this Christian missionary took this firsthand account from some people that he met. From our country, each village had to take 20 loads of rubber. We had to take these loads 4 times a month. We get no pay, we get nothing. Our village got cloth and a little salt, but not the people who did the work. It used to take 10 days to get the 20 baskets of rubber. We were always in the forest to find the rubber vines, to go without food, and our women had to give up cultivating the fields and gardens. Then we starved. Wild beasts, the leopards, killed some of us while we were working away, and others got lost or died from exposure or starvation as we begged the white men to leave us alone, saying we could get no more rubber. But the white men and their soldiers said, "Go. You are only beasts yourselves. You are only nyama meat." We tried, always going further into the forest, and when we failed and our rubber was short, the soldiers came to our towns and killed us. Many were shot. Some had their ears cut off. Others were tied up with ropes around their necks and bodies and taken away. The white men at the posts sometimes did not know of the bad things the soldiers did to us, but it was the white men who sent the soldiers to punish us for not bringing in enough rubber. This leads us to these horrifying images. The question is, how did King Leopold's management of the Congo lead to at least the deaths of 10 million people? So the force publique was given guns and bullets to go enforce, to go require people to pay the rubber tax. The problem is that as the rubber trees were tapped, you can't drain the same tree every year. You have to wait a while for the tree to recover. This means that the trees closest to civilization, closest to towns and villages, would get tapped out pretty quickly. And then the next time that the agents came and demanded rubber, you would have to go farther into the forest to get it. The further into the forest you have to go, the more dangerous it is, the longer you're gone, and the harder the work is, climbing higher into the trees, more danger from leopards and wild animals, more danger falling out of trees, and also longer time away from home, not taking care of your farm, and then ending up with your family starving because there's not enough people to work the crops. This meant that the force publique had to use more and more violent means to force people to pay the tax. Yes, these people have had their hands chopped off. The men on the upper right are holding severed hands. The children on the left have each had a right hand chopped off. The man in the middle is contemplating the severed hand and foot of his daughter. So, why chopping off hands? What is this? Obviously, if you cut someone's hand off, they're not going to be able to go do work for you, so it can't be part of the work encouragement. Sometimes it started off as the torture of captives, the torture of hostages, but eventually it developed into a system. The force publique, those young men that were recruited to make people pay their taxes, were given guns and bullets. In order to make sure that the young men were using those guns and bullets for the quote-unquote correct use, each bullet that was used had to come with proof that it was used to kill somebody who was rebelling or to kill somebody who was a hostage. How do you prove you've killed someone? Well, easy, chop off one of their hands. If they're dead, they don't need their hand anymore. It's kind of a receipt for the kill. The force publique was not supposed to waste bullets, not on enforcing the rubber tax. But sometimes when they shot somebody, they missed and the bullet went into the forest. Sometimes they used the bullets for hunting because the force publique were not paid quite as well as you might expect. And the Belgian government was afraid that the force publique would use the bullets, save them up, and then do some kind of rebellion or mutiny. So for each bullet that was issued, these soldiers were required to submit a severed hand as proof that they had killed someone. This kind of led to a strange situation. If you used a bullet for something other than killing a hostage, you needed a hand to prove that you killed a hostage. One easy way to do that is to chop off the hand of a defenseless child. A child left maybe alone because the parents are off collecting rubber. Chop off the child's hand. Now you have a receipt for the use of that bullet, and you don't actually have to kill the child. This led to a black market in severed hands. One way you could protect your village from having the force publique come and chop off the hands of your children was to go to some other village, kidnap a child, and chop off its hand. And then when the force publique showed up in your village, you could give them the severed hands of a stranger to protect your own family. Villages started raiding their neighbors and presenting hands as bribes to the force publique to get them to leave your town alone. The picture in the middle there is a man contemplating the severed hand and foot of his own daughter. Um, I'm not sure the context of this. It's not clear if it was the force publique that cut them off as a threat or if it was a neighboring village. But either way, you can see this sort of, not terror, but this sort of resigned depression here with this level of brutality. There's photos of this. Didn't people know it was happening? Couldn't people stop it? Well, yes, people knew it was happening. And people wanted it to stop, but King Leopold's agents, like this guy on the far right with the mustache, this guy in the mustache and the hat, they came up with an excuse. They said, oh, these hands were not part of the brutality. They were amputated in mercy because there's a virulent form of hand cancer going around the Congo, and these poor Africans, these poor children, had to have their hand or maybe foot amputated to protect them from cancer. It's a lie. It's completely not true, but it was the excuse that was given. That brings us to this image, which if we were in class in person, we could discuss together. So take a minute to see what you see in this picture. Maybe pause the video and look for some details. You have probably Congo African man in the middle, is my guess. You have a snake-like thing with the head of a white guy with a beard and a scary-looking face. He's got a crown on. You have what I'm guessing is a woman running away, holding what looks like a baby. You have a house in the distance. You have some palm trees. And this snake thing kind of seems to be coming out of the bushes. So maybe it represents like the vine of a rubber tree. So either the snake or the rubber is killing the man, is squeezing him to death. The king is also the snake who's squeezing him to death. Maybe the person is getting squeezed of their life, kind of like you squeeze the rubber vines to get the rubber out. And this woman with the child is running away in fear while the man does battle with the snake, rubber, king, Belgian white people. All right, that ends the instructions for today. You need to write a paragraph summary. Go back through the video if you need to, go back through the slides if you need to. Think about this. What technological innovations made Europeans able and willing to dominate people in Africa? So here's some sentence frames, some inventions that made Europeans able to control the Congo. This meant, and then separately, an invention that made Europeans willing to treat Africans brutally was, and this was because. Finish up your summary in your notebook. I will check this when I come back to school, hopefully next week.